It's Friday. It's time for KTLO, keeping the learning
on.
One of these days, we're all going to say it together, and we're all going to then faint and fall off camera.
I don't see that happening, Roy.
Yeah, I don't either. Never mind.
See, that just makes us unique, doesn't it? Timing is always going to be,
Are we unique?
Oh, we're unique.
Is it unique or extinct? That's the next question.
Correct.
So for today's episode 12, how do we do that? We keep doing these episodes right there, and there's the 10:02.
There's the 10:02, and it's right on time.
Episodes is really tiring.
The trains are running on time today, folks. I don't know
Yeah.
what that means. Today's topic is bold leadership. The engineer on that train, bold. Leader.
Yeah.
That is not, by the way, my favorite engineer that goes through here on the trains, who I refer to as Lena Horn.
Yes.
That was relatively short blasts of the train horn. But
That's
so
pretty.
bold leadership, what is it?
Cunning.
How do we do it? Why do we have it? Who cares? And then we move on. All right.
Would you like that match?
Could be, yeah.
I think we've got a few opinions here about bold leadership.
I think we do, and this is going to be a great episode because I don't know that we've converged on this, but here's the thing. Bold leaders are not the ones that talk the most, talk the loudest, talk first, or have a lot of big ideas. Let's just get that out of the way because sometimes bold leadership is confused.
Or even actually say it.
Yeah, I'm bold. Trust me on this one. I'm bold, right?
Yeah. Exactly.
So, Patty, that's your cue to say, well, I think bold leadership is.
So I think bold leaders are.
There's bold leaders right here.
Oh, there were a few there.
Here you go. Here's our official.
See, they're there. They're gone. They've made their impression. Nothing else need be said.
Correct.
Yeah.
I think everybody can read that, right? Taking risks and being confident and courageous.
Yeah.
I like this intrepid.
Intrepid is a great word. You know, I had the privilege of, I don't know if you remember the yacht Intrepid, which won the America's Cup yacht race year after year after year after year after year years ago. And I was driving into New York City one night and going across the George Washington Bridge, and on a trailer in front of me was the Intrepid. And I was just flipped out by the fact I said, wow, look at that beautiful big boat. And I pulled up behind it, and there on the transom it said Intrepid. And I was like, whoa.
What, you didn't get photos of the keel?
Oh, it was dark. Yeah. But anyway, it is a great word. There's also an American Navy aircraft carrier named Intrepid.
Mm-hmm.
It's a wonderful word, meaning similar to fearless.
Isn't it a Star Trek ship as well?
Probably.
I think there might have been, but I think the words are really interesting. Like there's another one there, like Valiant, and that always calls up like the knights of old.
Yes.
I think it's important to note that daring, intrepid, courageous, brave, valiant, fearless. That doesn't mean they're, like Greg said, standing out in front, with the battle shield. It's often the quiet work. It's the really quiet work that nobody else is willing to do.
Mm-hmm.
Or the investments that are made before whatever the time of testing or of demonstrating of bold leadership, i.e. developing people, encouraging people, creating a culture in which people can thrive and become powerful and successful so that when the time comes, they can execute.
And I often find that some of that behavior, like the bold attempt, and I've just lost my microphone. Give me a second. I often think too that it's that bold attempt behind closed doors, because quite often what people don't see is with bold leadership is that, we can be in that boardroom defending, protecting, serving the mission and the organization or the people, our team. Sometimes we've gone into bat for our team.
Yeah.
And the bold activity or the boldness is actually behind closed doors. They don't see that all the time.
Or just with the team. So that ability to be vulnerable enough to be able to create a unified team where you all understand each other and have a form of team cohesiveness or a mind model that you guys are working with in your team, or you folks are working with in your quiet team, that's, you can be quite bold in all of that.
I think there's a lot of truth. So some of the things that I've learned as I've been coached into eventually being the CIO is that frequently the meeting isn't the meeting. The work of the meeting happens before the meeting. In other words, it's your relationships. It's how you've built a consensus. It's how you've built support for your idea. So a lot of the boldness happens, over a cup of coffee or in an informal meeting or walking down the hallway, or as I did all too frequently, I knew the movements of various people and I just happened to put myself in that spot. It's like, hey, by the way, while you're here, I'd like to talk to you about that. I had a lot of strategic hallway elevator kind of conversations, and there was a fair amount of boldness in that, as opposed to being passive and letting those circumstances pass you by, or not making the investment, or worse, showing up to the meeting and believing that I'm going to be able to present my idea and bring it forward here now. And that's just not generally how things work. So I think go ahead.
No, I think that whole piece about the relationships, and there's so many multi-levels, right? So it's understanding the expectations. Everyone that attends that meeting should actually be showing up, having a good understanding of a decision that's being made based on previous discussions and conversations and things that are leading up to it, and be pretty clear. If you're, I don't believe you're a bold leader if you're walking in cold like that. Not at all. I think that
I would agree with that.
You're pushing an opinion down, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
I thought you were just going to say, I thought you were just talking to me. I thought you were just saying, Greg, I don't think you're a bold leader. Oh, okay. Thanks.
You were so accepting of that just then.
Like, okay, right. Hey, look.
Where's the passion in that?
Look, I don't have all the answers, right? And I'm resilient. I can take that. That's fine. Whatever. I used to like you, Patty.
Oh. Just out of curiosity.
Love the challenge.
Just out of curiosity, and this goes out to everybody. How much of leadership is preparation?
Oh, so much.
So much. I mean, if you're not going to take a trip, or if you do, it's going to be a different kind of trip. But if you're going on a journey or an adventure, if you're actually planning to set out on any kind of an adventure, you've got to have a couple of things in hand, right? You've got to have a map to know where you're going. You need to know where you're going to make some stops, how much fuel you have to get there, what kind of supplies you're going to need. There's,
how many times you're going to turn your clothes inside out.
Or back to front because you spilled on it. I don't know. But I think the important thing to understand is that if you are truly wanting to exhibit bold leadership, you're on a journey, and you don't have all the answers, but you can have a certain amount of preparedness. And then the people you meet on that journey are going to help you with some of those answers. Right.
But I think the other word that you've got here, Patty, in here is resilience. And that's part of what we've learned as we've gone along. So it's not just the preparation, because we know things can turn. I was going to say another word there. I just realized we're being recorded. I mean, things can turn upside down, A over T so quickly that no matter how much we've planned, we're not always going to be prepared for those other things. So I think part of bold leadership is also tapping into that resilience that we've got, and being able to look at our environment and know what we're going to draw on to take the next step forward.
Yeah, and I think that some of the relational stores that you have, the goodwill that you have in other people, is based on your ability to deliver in times past, i.e. your credibility is high, your trust is high, because you get stuff done, or you accomplish missions, or you maintain your relationships. You don't throw people under the bus. So when we're facing uncertain times and we don't have the answers, people say, all right, let's figure it out, because I trust you. I know you. I know who you are. I know what your values are. And because I've seen them lived out in challenging circumstances in the past. And I think that's part of your an asset you take into a challenging situation.
Oh, it's the only reason the four of us are together talking.
Is because
We've seen exactly how we operate in the past. We know each other. We know. See,
I thought you were going to throw me under the bus.
There's trust. That's that really unique trust relationship that I just love between the two of you.
Yeah. So at any time she could go off on something.
He can always trust I'm going to come back with some kind of story or, you know, something like that. But, you know, I was actually being nice, Gregory, man.
Yeah.
Oh my God, I'm heartbroken. No, I'm not. But that's the thing, is that we already know that at a deep level, at any time, if there was something that we needed, whether it was on a professional basis, whatever projects or clients we had, or even if we just needed to debrief, this is the beauty of having those kinds of relationships you're talking about, I think, Greg, you know.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Be
bold and venture
to be wise. And we're quoting Latin poets. How did that happen? We need some Catullus. No, we shouldn't go there. For anybody who's studying Latin poetry, Catullus is a little bit off. Yeah.
I could quote song lyrics from the 80s. Does that count?
Yeah, I believe some of that.
Depends on which song it is. Do I have to put
if it's a Latin song.
Oh, yeah.
All right. So,
you know,
go back to that one, Roy. Go back to that.
Go back to Horace?
Go back to that, because I love
Horace.
Go back to Horace. He says just begin. So you've got to start. You know, that whole idea of well, maybe I'm not ready. Well, maybe I'm not prepared, or sitting in fear because you don't think maybe you're qualified enough, and so you're just waiting. You're waiting until some point in time.
Stop wondering what if and just do it.
Just do it. Yeah, begin. Be bold.
Here's an interesting thing too. As long as we're talking about Latin poets, and Lord knows I studied enough Latin poetry to make most people sick. One characteristic of the epic poem, and in Latin that would be the Aeneid, written by Virgil. They begin in the middle of things, in medias res, and so there's not a setup for this. The story jumps into the beginning. If you read Homer, or go all the way back to the Epic of Gilgamesh, or the Iliad, the Odyssey, the Aeneid, Paradise Lost, all epics jump in right in the middle, and that's so you don't feel like you have to rewind to the beginning of a story you don't know. Start where you are. I think it says in some framework that we're probably familiar with.
There are principles, yes. Start where you are.
Where
else can you start, by the way, than where you're actually standing?
Yeah, I think a lot of people would like to start someplace other than where they are, because they may find themselves in the middle of a total mess.
Well, and I also think that frequently we wish we had somebody else's problems, because your problems seem a little easier to solve than the ones I'm familiar with.
Well, they are, Greg, but that's
called avoidance.
Well, I mean, right. Yeah. So, I mean, if we start from the premise of, I know the solution to this problem, whether it's the problem that I'm actually facing or not, you're not starting where you're at. I think that's where you need to, with your eyes wide open, say, what is actually happening here? What are the challenges that we face? What are the circumstances? What are the assets and the liabilities, or whatever, however you inventory your situation? And what do we do now?
It's too much
to
think about.
Stepping up, stepping into the situation, stepping up.
Yes, it is. But what I do like about this quote is venturing to be wise. It's not actually saying we're already wise. And I think that's a really important point when it comes to bold leadership. It doesn't mean that we know about that particular circumstance or what the outcome's going to be in that circumstance. But just taking that venture to become wise. We are going to learn about this as we get there.
Yeah.
And I think, and learn together, as we've often said on our episodes, that we're taking this journey together. We don't know. So venturing to be wise, I think, is a nice is not even the right word. What's the word, Greg? You know, I'm getting there.
It hooks into Patty's thought, which we expressed several times earlier in this series, about you don't know what the destination is, but you know who you want to be when you get there.
Yeah.
So this is saying what I want to be when I get there is wise. You venture to be wise.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I think when you talk about leading in an organization, especially if you move up into the higher ranks, the separation between who I am and what my values are, just me intrinsically, and how I show up at work and how I do the things that I do become very, very intertwined. And so there's a certain amount of authenticity that's required
Absolutely.
in a leadership role, because you don't get to play act when you're dealing with challenging things. You don't get to say, oh, what would a good leader do? Or who do I want to be? Steve Jobs, or, whomever that you think might be considered a good leader. You have to be you. You have to be authentic, and that's where you have to be willing to say, I don't know. I don't have all the answers. But what I do know is I'm dedicated, and I'm going to surround myself with smart people, and I think we can figure this out. I'm pretty sure we can figure it out.
I'm going to tell a story that I started to tell a few episodes ago, and on this topic of being who you are. And it involves Billy Preston, who was keyboard player, and it's the 1017. I apologize for the trains. I have no control over the trains. I just stand in the middle of the track and I'm bold. Billy Preston played keyboards with lots and lots of folks, including the Beatles, and he grew up not too far from where Ray Charles lived. And he was a total Ray Charles fan. He listened to everything Ray Charles. He learned how to play the way Ray Charles played, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. One day when he was young, maybe 12 years old, he felt brave and he went to Ray Charles's house and knocked on the door. And Ray Charles answered the door and invited him in. And he said, Ray Charles said, "Oh, you play?" And he said, "Yes." And he said, "Well, play something." And of course, Billy Preston played Ray Charles. And Ray Charles listened for a few minutes and he says, "Son, there already is a Ray Charles." And so Billy Preston went on to develop his own style and his own way to play. And that's part of it, is becoming yourself, and not, even though you absorb and you learn from other people, not becoming them, not becoming Steve Jobs, or not, because you can't.
No, and you see this in art. So anyone who's new as an artist, when you're painting, specifically is what I'm talking about, because that's what I do. When you're painting, you learn little techniques as you go, and then you begin loading those techniques up as you go until you've developed a style where you blend those techniques together for something that's totally and completely you, and people begin recognizing your art as a result of the way you've pulled techniques from elsewhere together. And I think that is your wisdom in your art. It's the same way in life and in leadership. All those things you pick up and bring with you and learn and hone and do through experience become your ability to create the leader you will be, and wisdom is grown through that.
And you may start by experimenting and copying the techniques of others, because that's how you're learning. And, I think we've all done it here. I've made the mistake of trying to be like one of the leaders I've really enjoyed seeing or emulate in the organization. And it just doesn't work, because your vocabulary, the way you're doing it, it's not the same. You're not going to sound the same, or it's not going to have the same impact as the way they've said it. So we are learning it, but it is so right that we eventually develop our own style. But we also have got to be careful not to get stuck in our own style and not develop and evolve that. And Patty, from doing artwork, we will shift and change according to the way we're feeling, what we're trying to express at that particular time. And I will go from abstract to, I will go from abstract to normal. So, what's normal? Normal was the wrong word, but you know what I mean.
I can't believe you just said normal. I cannot believe that.
Yeah, I know. Talking about normal?
In our industry, in the IT industry, if I can be slightly practical about this, is bring it to a point, is so often we bring a framework or a best practice or a standard approach to a certain problem, and we elevate the tools or the elements of good practice to being the truth or the right way, as opposed to You have to figure out how to apply those techniques to be you or to solve the situation that you're in.
Or within the environment that you're in, right?
Right, exactly. And I think that is part of the challenge that I think leaders face. You know, the old saying, you don't get fired for buying IBM or whatever the modern equivalent of that is. You know, the default activities that as a leader you can engage in those activities, and then we'll say, well, that was what we were doing. You can't get fired for doing something bold and courageous. You can do something that you truly believe is the right thing. And sometimes you win big and sometimes you don't win big. But that's where the action is knowing when you need to apply your own unique angle on it, or when you need to say, I think combine this, and this, I think this is the right thing to do, and go after that.
And that's being open. That's being open to the environment around you. That's situational awareness, really.
Yes.
Yeah. And I really feel it's really funny because, people make assumptions about how you are in that moment or how they saw you in that particular role or at that particular time. Yeah. And I've often, having come from military background, my first roles and, having some people say, oh, she's just too army the way she does things. And then there was the other ones when a few years later, especially when I was doing all the complementary medicine, it was like, oh no, she must be too soft to make a decision. And I'm going, and then she's a tough nut and whatever. So it's really interesting how people might describe you or understand your leadership. I'm going, well, I'm not really a tough nut. There's lots of cracks there. I just keep turning so fast they can't see them.
Hey, Patty.
Mindful leaders are intuitive, they're creative, they're honest, they're compassionate, they deeply resonate with what needs to be done.
So that last sentence that's on the screen right now, and it's attributed to Patty from an earlier conversation, they're courageous, they're curious, bold, agile, and nimble. I think you combine those relatively disparate ideas into a bundle and you make a unique style of leadership, and that really resonates with me. Say more about that.
There is some work that I've been doing in the book that I'm writing, and so I've put together some ideas of what bold leadership would look like, because it's really based on an adaptability quotient, right? You're looking at what do bold leaders do in an organization, especially one that is set or standard or likes the comfort of the status quo. And so when we're talking about bold leadership, where, like you said, we're not talking about the loud or the charismatic. So I put together 6 things that we really believe make a bold leader. It's somebody who's relevant to the mission. So when they're paying attention to that North Star we've always talked about. They're relevant to the mission. They toss out the obsolete, and that can mean people, technology, policies, procedures, frameworks.
So there are a few conflicting remarks there occasionally, but yes.
But really, and I don't mean obsolete as in old, because I'd be gone in a minute, but obsolete as in incapable of working to the mission, right? And they maintain some resiliency, and by resiliency that means overcoming challenges quickly, not getting absorbed and sucked into the vortex, but they're transparent and agile about it. They adjust in real time. This is one that is developing, and we're seeing that in IT a lot, the need for outside of IT, that bold leader who's willing to support and champion iterative trials, tests, the ability to fund it that way, and the recognition that this is an all business thing as opposed to just that little corner of the agile development for a little piece of software we might be doing, right? They're open-minded, so that means really managing their unconscious bias, really thinking about, am I biased here? And open-minded to the possibilities and the embracing of lifelong learning, right?
We're back to our wonderful emotional intelligence again.
Right? And then they're inclusive. So I think the inclusivity piece is really, really where the wisdom comes in, because this is where you invite and seek perspectives from others, right? That's that curiosity. So that's why I put that line together, is because overall, if you're going to be bold, you're going to be adaptable. And then through adaptability, you have to learn, what is my agility in that? So it's like in any sport, right? You're really going to like that football player who can take that field in rain, in snow, in whatever environment is going to hit them, and still be that kind of player who's willing to do the mission.
I just thought of 3 or 4 NFL players that I was going to name by name, but I decided you weren't making a sports analogy.
Well, I can make a different kind of sports analogy. I can actually talk about the horses. There's this great woman in Australia. She actually runs leadership courses using the horses, because, you know, if we're going to lead them through different challenges and things like that, they cannot lie. And it's learning how to communicate as a leader in a completely different way. And that is part of that bold leadership as well. That is actually really taking all of that understanding in and going, wow, you know what? Sometimes you just got to step in the ring and make that jump.
I think the thing that surprises people is that bold leaders appear to go with the flow, but there's all this underlying stuff that has kept them calm, and that's why we put these 6 together. It's kept them calm enough for everybody else to think, wow, that person's really got it together, even though you yourself as a leader are just, you know, cycling.
Although there is the occasional river in Australia where you might jump in and hold your nose and close your eyes and just hope you don't get chomped on, you know.
Chomped on, isn't that a bit of a euphemistic word?
I guess so, but that feels like some of the boardrooms I've been in.
I was just going to say, sometimes at the executive table, you go in and say, hey, this is an issue, this is a challenge, and you hope you don't get chomped on. And I can neither confirm nor deny pieces of anatomy that are no longer with me.
But you got to plant the alligator in the room.
Oh no, really? Are you all together still? Do we?
Oh, I was mildly chomped on.
Okay. Yeah, so Band-Aid level, or we actually had to call the paramedics?
No, it was just, I don't think I'm going to say anything else now.
Okay. We'll have the debrief after the session, okay?
Say anything else, but
too soon.
Afterwards, I went and researched, and I was right. So there you go. Anyway, moving on.
Sometimes when people say afterwards, when I did the research, they actually meant had a libation and then had a different perspective on the situation.
Libations are research.
It's just, speaking of libations, okay, it is Friday afternoon in France.
Okay, here's just, you know me in language, right? It's just a thing. I just, you said libation, and one of my pet peeves, hundreds of pet peeves. One of my pet peeves is that, and most often I've heard it on airplanes, is that we apologize today, we don't have any potable water. I'm like, no, it's potable water.
Yeah. We don't put this stuff in a pot.
Is a drink. We don't care if you put it in a pot or not. We don't care.
We could say we have various potions, but one of them is not water.
That's right. So now we're talking a little bit here about bold leadership as individuals versus organizationally, and Patty, do you want to just talk a little bit about that? What's going on there?
Okay, so learning adaptability and bold leadership is really kind of an experiential thing where you're performing different tests and trials as you move through. And where it becomes challenging is when you as an individual believe in bold leadership in one way and the organization doesn't necessarily. So I think there's some navigation that needs to happen, right? And we can't, bold leadership, as we've described and talked about, isn't prescriptive. Right? It's personal. So you as an individual need the opportunity to take a look at, what does bold leadership mean for me in my life? For instance, Patty, who really hates being on live video, is doing this cool thing with her friends, and that is bold leadership to me individually. And then what does it mean for you organizationally? So having the situational awareness to understand how your leadership or your personal style can fit within the environment that you're in. And you have to really think of it in both ways, right?
Sometimes that is experimental. I think you were right when you almost said experimental to start with versus
so that
experiential.
Is trial and error is experimentation, and it's experimentation over
hands
time.
up. I mean, I know that it's happened to me where when you're progressing as a leader, as you're learning to tackle all of these things and becoming a leader, and it doesn't mean you know, sometimes you have to leave the organization that you're in to move to another one because your experiment was not so good.
That's an alignment thing, right? You align with the values and beliefs that are with you. And some organizations you might find yourself in are so diametrically opposed to your value system that it is important to get out, right?
It's like, oops, okay, that didn't quite work.
It
might be time to move on.
But I'd like to make the point that sometimes what you have to offer might not be what's best for them.
Yeah, exactly. It's an alignment thing. And that's where I have to bring in, you know, when we talk about bold leadership and we think about people in organizations that say, we're going to, you know, go into this new market or blah, blah, blah. But there's organizational realities, accountability, governance, structures within the organization that say, that's not your call to make. That's a governing body call to make. That's not your call to make in certain cases. And so you have to understand wherein bold leadership really actually applies.
Absolutely.
And there's that, I keep using the word alignment. It's not really what I mean, but the understanding that I really need to understand what this organization is trying to achieve, what obstacles it face, and how can I boldly support that and pursue that, or where I realize that I may not be the right fit, or you may realize I'm not the right fit, or what I want to do or how I want to do it, my values, my thoughts, whatever, may not be with this organization. And that doesn't necessarily mean you're bad and wrong. It just simply means we have a misalignment here.
Do you know the most interesting, and I've never forgotten it, the most interesting thing I was asked at a interview, and this was to take over quite a large support area, and there were all sorts of security issues and everything involved. And the managing director, because we had the managing director and the HR person, so it was that kind of interview where you're going, whoa, this is a big one, right? And so I'm sitting there, but the interview's over. I think it was like the third interview through the process. And he walks to the door and I'm sort of left in the boardroom. They've all gone, and obviously someone's going to come back and get me to escort me. But he walked out the door and he turned around and looked at me and he said, I just have one more question. And you know when they say that, this is going to be the doozy. Do you have to be liked to do your job? And I tell you what, that is a real moment. And my response was, no, I don't actually have to be individually liked to do my job. Because for me, I think bold leadership is part of, we still build those relationships. You're not going to like everyone. Not everyone's going to like you. But that does not mean that you cannot come together on a particular goal or a mission that needs to be achieved. And I thought that was an amazing question. And that was a question asked to me when I was in my 20s. And I've never forgotten that. And it's still one that I think we should continually ask ourselves, because it helps recalibrate where we are. And Greg, by the way, great article.
Oh, thanks.
So
a question just popped into our chat here. What are your suggestions for leaders? What can they prepare for, practice, or study to enhance bold leadership? I.e., all right, so I'm listening. I get it. I hear you. So what do I go do? If I'm listening to you all night right now, what do I go do? What do I work on? How do I start taking the journey towards being a bold leader that is capable of doing this? And since I asked the question, you guys could answer it first.
Thanks, Greg.
Thanks, Greg. First thing, you know, I coming from the philosophy side, know thyself.
Well, I think
do an assessment of yourself and what your values and motivations are. I know, understand that, and then study the topic. I mean, learn more about leadership. And there's a bazillion ways to do that. You don't have to go through a course to do it.
Right.
There's some great reading out there. Stephen Covey on trust. So many people on leadership, whether you go to John Maxwell or Simon Sinek or
listen to all our episodes.
Listen to all our episodes.
Read my upcoming book.
Read Patty's upcoming book.
Yeah, a little plug there. But three areas of whatever suits your style. So there's lots of leadership out there. Not all of it will suit your style. But the three areas that I would focus on are emotional intelligence, social intelligence. So those are Daniel Goleman. And then adaptability quotient. So take a look at what that looks like, because adaptability quotient is how you learn how to be agile. So those three things.
And for me, I will actually
awareness and adaptability.
And on top of Goleman's work too, I would very much look at Dr. Paul Ekman's work around emotional intelligence and leadership as well. He is one of my absolute go-tos for that. That spreads from there. There is so much around, and really great stuff around resilience as well, resilience and leadership. But it's not just about your own resilience, which you have to learn and experience anyway before you can help others through that. Yeah. That's really critical. But
the best resilience person I've ever seen is Janine Shepherd. I don't know if you know her work, but Janine is phenomenal, and she is doing a whole new series on resilience, and she's got some upcoming courses too if you're interested in pinpointing resilience.
Yeah, I think there's a whole lot of cool stuff around that.
Mm-hmm.
So I for whatever reason, and I think it depends on organizationally where you've been and whatnot, but I frequently have people that literally walk into my office and say, I want to be a leader. I want to grow. I want to develop. And so, I mean, essentially ask this question. So what do I do? And so
a leader of what?
Exactly. So, and I usually ask that. It's like, what does that mean to you? Because if you want to, I want to become a team lead. I want to become a supervisor. I want to become a manager. I want to become a CIO. It's like, all right, so you're talking about a career step, not a leadership thing. So and so we kind of sort those out, because I think there's a positional leadership. Managers should be leaders, maybe not. But so when we're talking about bold leadership, we're differentiating managing a set of activities versus leading people, and beyond leading people into a bold leadership. So bold leadership particularly applies, I think, in trying circumstances, in times where we're really challenged. We don't know the answer. If you go back to, and if you listen to these episodes, you'll hear the number of times that I talk about complexity or complex adaptive systems. But when we're dealing with situations that are not simple, even with our ability to comprehend and understand them, we have to apply different practices to figure them out.
Yeah, we do.
I think a standard off-the-shelf leadership says, okay, I'm faced with a situation, index, here's the answer. Right? That's not leadership, truly. And that's management. That's a useful thing. But leadership, I think, is, I've never faced a situation before. I don't even clear on how this thing is wired together. I pull on this little thing here, and this thing is moving in a way that I can't figure out. So how do I figure it out? And how do I get people to come with me to come along and help us?
Well, this is the other interesting thing I've found. The people aren't always, they might come with you at that particular time, but having been in a position, having to move around every couple of years and things like that, it's really important for me that those people, which I want with me at the time and on the mission that we're doing at the time, but I know already that within that year or within that 2 years, I am going to be moving to a completely new location. And as a result of that, I have to look at this in a completely different manner. And for me, it places the emphasis not just on helping to develop the team to, there was the old saying, it's not what happens when you're there, it's what happens when you're not there. that actually makes the difference in terms of how successful something was. And I think part of that to me is succession planning, that I must always leave an organization better than I found it, regardless of the role. I don't care whether it was a 3-month contract or whether this was for 2 years or it was for 5 years. That organization is going to survive without me. And that to me is really critical. But it's also too, it's remembering that this is not about self-serving. This is about making the right decision regardless of what those consequences are. So I was once in all the mergers and acquisitions, and I have an article called Mergers and Acquisitions because it feels like that. And where I was actually offered to go to the new city, but my circumstances did not permit that. They said, well, if you do this report and we're merging the teams and we're going to do this and you have to choose which location it's going to be. And that's a really tough one because you know who's got mortgages and who's got this and who's got that and everything else that's going to happen. But in the end, the decision, I ended up sending it to the other city because it was the right decision for the organization. It was the right decision to make in that role. But it also meant that I was no longer going to be in that role. So the important factor becomes that succession planning, ensuring that they can have the best possible stability and resilience to take the next step.
Putting the mission before yourself.
Absolutely.
But I like what you said, Roy, about know thyself, because that is the starting point. That is all about if I want to be a leader, I have to understand my values, my beliefs, my behaviors. What empathy looks like, what presence looks like, where does my integrity align with where we're going. So that's all personal stuff. That's all, you know, looking at where you are in terms of your philosophy and your authenticity, and then moving into situational awareness and connectedness. You don't become a leader because you start at connection, you start at self, right?
Yeah, I think that's really important. I think you have to, and again, you know, it going back to what Simone said about what happens when you're not there. I think you have to look at yourself that way too. Is it, what are your real core values? What are your real ones? I mean, there's all things we tell ourselves that we think we feel and we kind of don't maybe. So you have to assess yourself realistically and know that, yeah, I need to work on that. And that's part of it too, is do the work.
So that it leads me directly to one of the points that in a mentoring relationship where I'm trying to influence somebody, I want to put them in a situation where they can stretch themselves and fall short or fail, not because I'm setting them up, but because that's what happens. And I think one of the reasons that have participating in sports or other competitive activities is a really good learning. There's lots of ways to do that. It's not always about sports, but the idea that you have to face that you tried your best and you fell short, that you work together as a team and we didn't win the game. And that's where I think you start finding out what your true values are. It's like, it's all teamwork and camaraderie, but when we didn't win, now all of a sudden I'm throwing my colleagues under the bus. I'm lamenting that they didn't do their best. And it's like, wow, you just found out something about yourself. It's like, it's all teamwork until things go south, and then you are kind of an ugly individual on the inside.
But that's really taking a step back and challenging the voices in your head, right? Because those belief systems will creep up and say, they'll say things to you in your mind that you have to shut down, challenge, or go beyond.
That's why you're going to go back and rewrite the script.
Yeah, and rewriting the script for sure. Yeah.
And I think when you face those demons, sometimes it's you face some really ugly stuff. And I think in good times, when you're having success after success, I think you can kind of stuff that in the back or have a false sense of, I'm in great shape, I'm doing good. To Roy's point, what are your real values? And if you're bold and open to that, you can say, wow, interesting. I need to work on that. Or becoming aware.
I asked the question then when you actually said that, I think bold leadership, and we've talked about authenticity, is also associated with allowing vulnerability.
Yeah, I do too.
Absolutely. The idea of challenging belief systems, those belief systems, when we're working with our clients, we talk about shadow beliefs and positive beliefs. And we have beliefs that carry us forward and beliefs that hold us back. And being willing, you cannot be vulnerable until you are willing to admit that your shadow beliefs exist and that they are holding you back, and being able to challenge them. And being bold means that you're vulnerable enough to admit it, and then you're bold enough to step past it and find a different way to work or be.
Whew. That was the big one. Sorry.
It was a big one. Just in case you'd like to get a hold of any of us, we're on Twitter, and you can tweet a question or a comment to with the hashtag KTLO Learn, and we'll see it. And
we might even respond.
You might also mention that we're starting to post content on KTLOlearn.com, where we're growing some resources derivative of the content that we're doing here. Love to get people's readings and get some feedback on what we're doing out there, because we don't have all the answers. We're figuring it out. We're being vulnerable, and we're in this together.
Being us.
Yeah, it's just me being me.
I also think leaving this conversation, maybe take a step and ask yourself, what does bold leadership mean for me, and what does it mean in the setting in which I'm in? Asking the hard questions.
Yeah. That's your homework assignment, everybody. Go ask
okay,
yourself.
hang on. Yep, that's the homework assignment. But wait one. It is Friday. It is the end of the week. I want to say, what was your happy moment this week?
Happy moment this week.
Happy moment this week. It could have been the toot of that horn. Was it Lena Horne?
No, it wasn't Lena Horne today. Lena will go by probably later in the day. And Lena, let me just explain. Lena starts blowing the horn about a half mile back and continues a single blast all the way through the crossing and off about as far as you can hear it.
So she knows how to hold a note.
She does. Yeah, she can hold that note.
Love it.
Hold that note. Hold that note.
Yeah.
What about for you, Miss Patty?
All right. Happy moment this week. I am completed 3 chapters in 5 of my rewrite.
Wow! Yay! Go girl.
Yeah.
Gregory.
So I'm working on a number of writings that I'm not at liberty to discuss publicly, but I've made some massive progress, and in my brain I've connected a lot of dots, and so my brain right now is on fire with how all of these topics interrelate, and I can't get it on paper
So what you're saying is the circuitry's working.
The what?
The circuitry's working.
Finally, get this thing going. Jeez.
He's plugged in. I love it.
I was going to say something about resistors, but I decided not to.
Wow. Is this Pick on Greg Day? Is that officially Pick on Greg Day?
No.
You didn't get that memo?
I just in my calendar.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
You know, for me, I had I was doing some behind the scenes interviewing yesterday, which was really fun, talking to some guys and getting into what their experience was about. But you know what? My moment of happiness right now is you guys, and that it's Friday.
Aww.
And cheers.
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 That's my pocket of happiness right now.
And right before we went on the air this morning, I sucked about a quarter of a cup of coffee into my lungs. So it was good for me. Was it good for me? It was great.
Yeah.
All right, everyone. Thank you. What a wonderful joy it is to spend the end of the week with all of you.
Have a terrific day. Have a great weekend, and keep the learning on.
Keep the learning on.
Whatever that means. Yeah.